Hello ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? Force here, welcome back. Doing a strategy video for you today. Today we're going to be taking a look at some Zerg strategy. Now the Zerg player here is ATN's Dark Force and the opponent here is Mouse's Mana. Now we're not going to be looking at a build order. We're not going to be looking at, a particular do this, do that, do the other thing. We're actually just be talking a little bit more about responding to your scouting. And obviously everyone knows this is a huge important part of the game, a huge important part of StarCraft. But that ever important decision as Zerg when you're dealing with your larva as to whether or not you're going to be producing units or whether or not you're going to be producing attacking forces. Either you're going to be getting your workers, your drones, or you're going to be pushing out for an attack. So what we're going to see this game is something that I'm sure most of you Zerg players are pretty familiar with, just opening up with that one base play, and then moving into the expo. But the point in the game we're going to be looking at is going to come post-scout and seeing an expo. That's kind of the important part that we're going to take a look at. So starting things out here, what we see is Mana's going to be coming out with this expansion right here. That's the main, but we're going to see him come out by pushing out into the expo, which is just to the bottom right here. Now, an important part to consider as well is the map. A lot of the maps now that we're looking at in this map pool have some really interesting openings, some really wide open areas that you can really abuse. So here's the main, and we're going to be seeing him push down at the expo here. And this is a very popular tactic, starting out with that Forge Fast expand against Zerg. Pretty popular, and you're going to see a lot of players do that. So here's what's happening. Dark Force is moving out with his units, with that scouting observer. He's seeing the Forge Fast expand. He knows at this point, okay, that's what's happening. Now what you actually end up seeing is that the second that he saw that drop down, he came down with this Roach Warren. And let me actually pull back just to show it to you so we can see that exact timing. So let's pull it back right here. And there, so that you can see in the minimap over there, the Overlord is pulling out. He sees the expo go down. So at this point in the game, a lot of times, let me pause just for a moment. A lot of times, it's right about now that you're going to be actually a little bit closer to 21. But what you would typically see in this position is Dark Force. You can see he pulled guys off the extractor, pretty normal. What you would typically see is at this point in the game, you wouldn't be going for Roach Warren, but a lot of times you're just going to be sitting with that expansion, and then you're going to be working on your economy. But what's going to happen here is because this scouting Overlord, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Overlord, you could have scouted out with your Zergling and checked that there was the expo coming by looking at that frontal wall off there. And in seeing that, again, knowing that this expo is here, just because of the fact that there are buildings right out front as opposed to right at top of his main ramp, which is what you would typically see. So again, we want to think about what would typically take place, and we want to see what exactly Dark Force is doing based off of his scouting information. So here's the main. He saw nothing at the front, and he saw that natural expansion was coming up with that cannon. He knew that Forge Fast expand was taking place. As a result, he comes down right away with this Roach Warren. So let me pick it back up right now. I'll play straight through. And so he's deciding to respond with that Roach Warren this early. I mean, going for roaches against Protoss, pretty standard, but typically you would not see it this early. But again, seeing that expansion, he's going to decide, okay, I'm going to push out with that Roach Warren and try to get those roaches earlier in the game. And at the same time, what we're actually going to be seeing Dark Force doing is not droning up quite as hard as he typically would. Not only did he drop down that Roach Warren, he also at the same time resaturated that extractor, continuing up his scouting. He's seeing that the Cybernetics Core is just now coming in, so he's really not worried about losing this Overlord. And at the same time, once you get your first 2 or so Zerglings out, what you could do is go ahead and just bring some guys to the front just to check any additional buildings that are up front. That's definitely going to be an option. But the great thing about, whoa, here we go, lost that for a minute. The great thing about any Protoss player who goes for something like a Forge Fast expand is that they really can't sentry off that frontal wall. It really isn't an option. So if you can push forward with some roaches and Zerglings, you're actually going to be in a really solid spot. So let's take a look here. Look up at that production right now. Typically, at this point in the game, 5 minutes into the game, you would be seeing a lot of Zerg players just droning up very hard and saturating that expansion. We can see right now, Dark Force has no saturation going on at the expo. He has cut all drone production, and he is just pushing out. And what we're going to see him do is actually, this is a pretty interesting tactic, very effective as well, only getting a few roaches. He's not getting a ton of roaches. Taking a look at that unit station, we can see he's just sitting on the 5. He's also cut that extractor, the gathering as well, and then continue to pump out all Zerglings. Now the point of this is getting just enough roaches to bust through that frontal cannon and then running rampant inside of your opponent's base with those Zerglings. So he's going to be target firing down that cannon, and then going to be pulling in and target firing down this cannon as well, and then just running straight through Mana's base with these Zerglings. And basically, because of the fact that his opponent here, Mana, went for such an econ heavy build, he got so many workers early in the game, and as a Zerg player, Dark Force cutting back all of that worker production and going for this push allowed him to break through and win the game very quickly. So that's just something important to realize. If you can keep up that persistent scouting with your Overlord, and you can see the fact that your opponent, the Protoss player, is going for that Forge Fast expand, and they're working on their probe count very hard, they're working on their econ incredibly hard, and you just cut your drone production and you push for that early aggression, you can definitely win the game very early against someone who's trying to be greedy and going for that very, very quick expansion. Now realize at the same time, there's obviously a flip side to the coin. There's pros and cons to everything that you do in this game. In going for this, had Dark Force not done significant damage, had Dark Force not done significant damage to Mana. Now, he didn't necessarily have to force the GG, he didn't have to win, but he needed to do a really heavy amount of damage. But had he not, if for one reason or another Mana had managed to stop it, let's say instead of going for the Stargate, the Mana actually worked on just a couple gateways and was able to warp in enough sentries to push this back, then what would have happened is Dark Force would have been incredibly crippled, because his economy is very lacking as opposed to his opponent, again deciding to not drone up and go for that heavy early aggression. So when you're doing something like this, realize that it's very all-in-y and you have to do significant damage. So do everything that's possible to make sure that you take out a lot of buildings, possibly going straight for a Cyber Core to knock them back in tech. If you see something like a Stargate, trying to knock that out very quickly as well. And then obviously, if you can take out the expansion, that is a huge gain for you as well. So just a little bit of basically kind of a basic stuff, but just to realize that decision making between either droning up or pushing early, it should be based all the time on your scouting information. And if you see someone working for heavy econ, then cutting back drone production and pushing out early is going to be super effective. So once again, guys, this has been Force from Force Strategy Gaming. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. As always, if you do enjoy the content, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Keep watching and keep owning. A few hallucinated phoenixes, so that's going to force these guys to push back at the exact same time. We do have Curious pushing into the third base, going to be trying to snipe down a few of these buildings. Needs to be careful though, we do have reinforcements coming from Huck, and great force fields trapping the guys of Curious on this side of the base and forcing them to get chopped down at the same time. Mutilous harassment going down inside the main base of Huck, managing to kill quite a few workers there, and that is actually very unfortunate for Huck. He lost a lot of his workers, and this push is still coming from this side. These roaches not really caring about all these sentries, just doing what they can to snipe